Done redirecting. Done redirecting.
I heard that.
Holy fuck. Okay, so I'm gonna mute this shit now. Hi, welcome. This is Art of Rock, or Art of Fucking Unbearable Fucking Turmoil, as we're calling it today. Hello and welcome. Oh my God, we've had a really great morning, or I've had a really great morning. This is funny because it's like Resi has been so amazing to help get this fucking thing going, and now what I'm about to do is just rip Resi apart, which we'll get to in a moment. It's your shame day today, son. Thanks, guys. You're fucking saving my ass. First and foremost, as usual, I acknowledge the Tongva people as the traditional landowners of Los Angeles. Thank you for surviving, and may you be healed now and always. Every Saturday morning, we're here, hopefully, an hour ago. And that's where you watch us, is on Angelspit's bloody Twitch or YouTube or whatever. I think we're everywhere. I just don't know. This is made possible by Angelspit's Patreon. Many of the members are here, and I thank you so much. Hey, well, look, it's actually working. $3 a month, and you can help me keep this shit show going, and I really appreciate it. Hey, that's not how you spell kickstarting. The new album from Ice Planet 9000 is kickstarting now. Do me a big favor. Go have a listen. And it'll cost you $8 to support it. And I could really use it. It's a fucking good album. I'm very proud of it. And if you don't want it, then listen to it on Spotify or Tinder or bullshit, whatever the fuck. And you're really going to help me out. And there's a whole bunch of other amazing music that you need to listen to as well, called the Industrial Incisions playlist. It's there. Go listen to it. It's a whole bunch of old shit and a whole bunch of new shit. But it's awesome. Get it. After this, we are rating to MTV TV. Happy 3 years. It's there. And welcome. Oh my God, welcome. So this is called Grilling Resi. Resi, will you show us your and today's probably only going to go for an hour because I fucked the world. Show us the camera where you show us your rack of shame. Okay. So can you run us through your rack of shame, please?
Yeah, definitely. So going from the very top of it, there's just a patch bay, and then there's a Blackmagic ATEM video switcher that I don't use at all. It's not even connected to anything, but it's filling rack space.
Good. Right.
Yeah, exactly. It would be. It's very expensive. I hope to sell it to somebody who could actually deal with the fact that it has about 18 really tiny fans all tuned to slightly different frequencies. Oh. It's unusable in the room that you're working in. It has to go in an equipment rack. The next thing is the Onsonic DP4 Plus, which I don't get a lot of use out of.
That's a really good effects machine.
I used the hell out of it for live.
Wow, that's a great effects machine.
Yeah. Four independent effects or a stack of very complicated effects down into two. It's got a lot of routing options and some grit and a lot of character. Then I've got a SciQuest SCSI drive.
Then with the days.
Yeah, definitely most of my oldest stuff is on that. And then I guess the more interesting stuff that you were sort of looking at is the Roland Dep 5, which is the first effects processor that I got. It's
great one.
Yeah, there's a chorused reverb that's in it. Like it'll do like a long tail reverb with a freeze and then do like a modulation after it. And that was pretty unique at the time. And I used that a lot with a MIDI switching pedal, so I could play a guitar swell into it and like hold a long chord and then put a new note in and a new note in, and you get this like sort of Robert Fripp kind of spatial build a chord one note at a time with the volume pedal kind of stuff.
Wow, that sounds like a really great means for experimentation.
You
know where this is going.
Hopefully. Under that is another Onsonic ESQM, which is
how do you pronounce Ensonic?
I like saying Onsonic because it's fun.
That's great. I like calling
definitely
DeVoe because they look like a wanker. Yeah. Like, go ahead, please.
That one is analog filter section, like probably the Curtis chips or something. I don't even remember, but digital waveforms. It's a little bit PPG, a little bit gritty, and it's got some actual filtery character, so you can do analog Moog style.
Can you control the filters via MIDI?
Absolutely. The editors, wow. CV, it's got a couple of control assignable controls
it has
for MIDI.
CV input on the back.
And on the back, yeah, also, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So
and hold
at
on,
least
is it multi-timbral? Because it's got a sequencer. Does that have the sequencer built in? The ESQ1 has a sequencer. Does the modular have a sequencer? Therefore, next question is it multi-timbral? And it's
it
8
is
note.
it is multi-timbral, but it only has 2 outputs. If I'm imagining back, I might be wrong about this, but I think it's left and right. So you could actually pan and get 2 sounds out of it at once, but you can stack sounds. There's a multi-page that'll allow you to configure, but there's also a mono mode, so you can stack oscillators. I don't want to get into too much details because this is about shame about how much I haven't used it after all. So being specific like that might be, I might be putting this.
Yeah, you're really digging yourself a hole here.
Exactly.
Now, this is we're about to pie you in the face. It's been a long time since there's been a pie fight.
I don't want that to happen.
Studio pie fight!
The next thing down is the Akai S950, which is my first real sampler.
Wow, that's considered a classic now.
It is. I got so much mileage out of that thing.
Yeah.
And what you and I were talking about a little bit earlier is I tend to use it right now in more of a way like I remember I have that on a floppy disk or SideQuest cartridge, which is what the IB105 interface board, that it's an add-on daughter card that you can stick in the back to get a SCSI port on it, which will talk to the SideQuest cartridges. But it also speaks MIDI SDS. Oh, maybe that one doesn't. One of them does. The next thing down is the Yamaha TX16W sampler, which is a stereo 16-bit gritty as hell device, which definitely spoke MIDI SDS, and that was fun for actually taking samples back and forth between a workstation controller like the PVDPM3 or something that could load small samples into it also, and sample that on the front end and then send them to the keyboard. But most of what I do with any of those right now is turn them on, print them to audio, and then turn them back off. And then I don't use them again for a very long time. And I do, I keep a noodle track around on the song that I'm working on with some elements from that thing. And if I need to go back to it to, recompose or re-record something, it's going to be there. But things in that rack generally don't stay on all the time. And I don't assume that they're ever going to come back on if I turn them off. So they're more used in a precious way that I like what this does, but I don't want to assume it's going to always work and be accessible. In contrast with like VSTs or other things that recall 100% perfectly every time you flip back on. Those I don't render. These things get rendered. They get fixed to a 2-track. I think that's everything in there.
And you said something about that. There's there was an update for the TX.
Yeah. This would have been like maybe 92 or so. And it's not at all surprising that they could do better than the software that was built into the thing, because it was very limited as delivered. But the name Magnus Lindstrom came up, and it's the same person that wrote Maelstrom in Reason, which is one of my favorite synths as far as kind of a wavetable-y digital hybrid kind of thing. He provided alternate operating system for the TX16W. You could download it from a BBS that you were dialed directly into and put it on a floppy and, boot the thing with his alternate operating system. And it did allow like dynamic voice allocation and different sampling algorithms and resampling internally. And it was just in general a lot more modern with like undo and stuff than what shipped with the TX16W originally.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And you've also got a Pro 1.
I do. Is that in the shot? That's probably in the dark next to it. Oh, you can see the very edge of it, but that's the Pro 1. And then there's some other garbage in that rack that's not even connected, including like DAT machines and serial MIDI interfaces and an ADAT for doing another 8 channels out of my digital audio interface once in a while over light pipe, ADAT light pipe. So
wow, go that light pipe. So you've got a banging 90s setup there. Know what it is?
Yeah.
Because it's really like, plus a few more bits and pieces, but you've basically got the core guts of what frontline assembly used to do tactical neural implant, and also like a lot of like that's half the gear of Skinny Puppy's Too Dark Park. So, I mean, arguably, but we've got. I want to have a conversation about. So you got all this gear, to which there are users who would wet their pants over to get their hands on this stuff. Is how do you utilize? Maybe it's a challenge to you. It's not. I don't want to challenge people anymore. But I really want to challenge myself and say, look, I want to talk about the difference in creative workflow of using these gear in a way that was 90s. So I want to talk about how we used to make stuff on the Atari in the 90s, because I did just watch a documentary about Songs of Faith and Devotion, and they're using an emulator 3 and a fucking Atari, and I went, oh my God, I don't want an Atari, just letting you know. So there's some thoughts open about what does a 90s mentality mean to you? What and the objective of the exercise is to get inspired to use old gear or plugins of old gear if you don't have the old gear. Rezi, hit me.
I'm going to go through the sort of the chain that I would have used with this gear around 92 through 96 pretty quickly. But there was something else that you triggered me wanting to say about it. In addition to that, maybe it'll come to me as I go through it. But my first sequencer proper was what you were looking at to compose the stuff with a keyboard controller attached to it. Would have been a Mac SE30 running Studio Vision, which to this day has features that are unmet by any modern DAW or sequencer in later revisions, but that's a different discussion altogether. So starting with the MIDI sequences on that, it would come out of probably a big, serial port to MIDI port conversion box of some sort, multi-ports, and those MIDI cables would be connected to a MIDI patch bay of a JL Cooper kind of ilk, so that you could have more than two things running back into the computer. And those would go out to the devices in that rack, and those would get MIDI note information, chords and notes, and MIDI program change information in some cases to, in the cases of effects. And after that, they would go back into, say, a 16-channel mixer of some sort, and all of the stuff would have to be left on, of course, and playing to hear anything. You would turn on the computer, you would turn on the synths, you would have MIDI going out to them, and you hit start on the sequencer, on the proto DAW of the time. There was no audio in it. It was strictly MIDI. The audio would come out of the synths, go into the mixer, and then go into a DAT machine or a 2-track cassette, depending on which era it was. But I got DAT for going to 2-track pretty early on too. I sold a Les Paul that I owned from teenage years to get a DAT machine, and that was like sort of the Rubicon right there, and definitely changed my approach to things. And as far as like a controller, I had a couple of workstations that had keyboards attached to them that weren't just rack modules, including the aforementioned PV DPM3, which was my first not actual sequencer, but it had a sequencer built into it. So that would be the controller. You play notes, it goes through the computer decides where they come out, comes out of your MIDI multi-port interface, goes through your patch bay and hits your rack of stuff, goes into a mixer, you hear it in stereo or record it in stereo. And when you shut it off, it's all gone. You have to like reload your disks and programs, and hopefully you remember to store them. Maybe you've got a librarian on the computer, but that's probably a different level of interaction than I usually had with it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Please pat that cat. What's his name again? Her name?
This is Josephine.
Josephine. Please
She's
give
being
Josephine.
Extremely well behaved today. So
she is. She's not walking on keyboards.
I know.
Thank you, Josephine. Thank you, Rezi. That was really interesting. Alex, hit me.
For me, the most enticing thing would be to use 90s or 80s or early 2000s equipment and to not have it sound like 90s, 80s, 2000s, and just use it in an unusual way. Maybe put lots of weird MIDI messages to it so it sounds a bit weird I think like people like Aphex Twin were doing this sort of thing like already in the time, but I think that's where I am interested. Like this thing sounds much like 1991 or maybe 1989, but if you program it right, it can sound quite modern or make sounds that aren't like widely used in cliches. But of course, you can also make like. Okay, it's too quiet, but it's a poly synth. Yeah. So that's for me the thing, and I think like also the philosophy of music equipment was different back then, because you usually could just afford a couple of things, but because of that they could do almost everything. And I sort of miss that nowadays. I think there's some companies still doing that, but it's gotten rarer and rarer, and the gear has gotten cheaper and more not as broad in their scope.
Thank you so much. It's interesting that I remember when I used to buy a piece of gear, I was looking at a piece of gear. The first thing I would look at was, is it multi-timbral? Can I get several sounds out of it? Then does it accept MIDI volume and panning? Those two things don't matter to me anymore. Those three things don't matter to me anymore. Like now I can handle having a keyboard that is omni, it's only on the one MIDI channel and it only outputs one sound, but what it does, it's exceptionally good at. It's interesting that a lot of keyboards pre-2000 did not have a controller for filter cutoff. They didn't have reverb, EQ, all of these different things per channel. So it's really interesting, like, because where I'm going with this is that although a lot of effects units did, where you could control reverb time, wet dry amount, all of that sort of thing could be controlled with MIDI quite simply. And the wonderful thing is when you change that during a song, it sounded like a truck changing a gear and grinding gears, and it was fantastic because a lot of that stuff was a 12-bit, 16-bit. Which is why I love the Emacs, because you can control, you could do some fuckery and internally patch stuff. So MIDI A would be assigned to the filter and stuff like that. You could do stuff, but every time you hit stop, the filter would go back to whatever its initial amount was. All of this has got a really wonderful mindset of what you're working on, and the way it alters the way you make music. That for me, I have become more lazy with DAWs. For me, as you know, I've talked about many times, it's hard for me to turn everything on, either because my brain's fucked or because I'm lazy or because I just don't know why. But I've come to realize that the more time I spend in hardware, and this might be just me, the more time I spend in hardware, the better the track is. Because the more time I'm spent on working on these little tiny intricacies, like really cool fills or, it's really important for me that vocals and the music comes together, it happens together. Excuse me again. Because the vocals might do a thing, and I want the bass line to follow it. Like the vocals might be going ba 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 ba, and that's the riff. But then suddenly goes ba 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 ba, then back to it ba 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 ba. So the bass line's doing a thing, and then at that moment where it does something different, the bass line talks with it. Boom ba bang bow ba 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 ba, back into it. And there's all these little things that are going on. And sure, if you're using soft synths, you can do that at any stage of the production, even in the final mix. Which is why I can't use soft synths, because firstly, I don't like the sound. Secondly, I don't like the tactility of it. My computer isn't strong enough. And also there's just something about when you have hardware, you have to print it to tape. You have to dedicate it. You have to make a decision, and that's it. You're done. So in a lot of ways, I'm trying to get back to hi, Josephine. I'm trying to get back to. I would just so be cuddling her right now. But anyway, yeah, go on, give her a cuddle, pick her up, stick your face in her face. There's. I'm trying to get back to the way that I wrote a lot of stuff in the 90s because of the limitations. And I think I was a better programmer back then because you had to be. You couldn't cover programming with fix it in the edit and do all of this other stuff as well. And that's something that I'm really lacking, is that MIDI's still there. But the crown of MIDI has gone from MIDI to audio. So now you instead of fucking with the velocities of a drum, you're just going through and dropping the waveform or whatever in that moment. And that's just not fun to me. Or it is fun. No, it's not. It's not fun to me. I'm doing an experiment at the moment with Ice Planet 9000. I feel like I'm boring people with Ice Planet 9000 right now, where I'm doing a live thing, playing in my very bad way. Hashtag Carl needs to fucking work on his chops because they suck. And then editing and fixing it up a little bit, then putting it down live. Because in the 90s, that's what you used to do. You would push play on Cubase or whatever on the Atari. It would go into the mixer. The mixer had all the EQ in it. And then that would record onto a DAT or whatever and that was it. And I'm trying to do that again now, but it goes on to it's going on to, like, I'm recording it onto the DAW. So the parts aren't separated. If I want to go through and tweak something, too late, dude. I have to set up the whole mix again and drop the whole mix again. And the great thing about that is that it is adding an amount of energy to things that I can't do on a DAW because it feels live. It's live. And the thing about energy is that there's mistakes and stuff in it. That's all I'm going to say because I'm prattling now. Resi, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm not exactly sure where the fun line is of like trying to 90s it up and stick to the basics. But Alex, you totally reminded me when you were talking that I did try a purist kind of concept maybe last year, middle of last year sometime, where I was going to limit it to process that and instruments mostly that I could have done at any time with that same gear, starting with ESQM and drum samples from that rack, and turning on the old sequencer and MIDI patch bays and stuff wasn't part of that. Like that was on the other side of the fun line. Like it didn't seem like, unless I was going to start a YouTube nostalgia channel where it might, actually be a hit for some people, the actual work and effort in going into that didn't feel inspirational. It felt like obstacles and it felt like unnecessary parts of getting somewhere neat. And, like it didn't hit, like it didn't capture my momentum, my creative, inspiration the same way that I thought it would when I was thinking about doing it. And that seemed amazing, but the actual practical part of, turning the things on and, making sure they worked and going with the more purist stuff that required me to de-archive copies of old software. That was where I got off. So it would have been, Ableton Live being the sequencer and patch bay and recording medium and doing it as a 2-track thing. Maybe I'll revisit it, like really sticking to that and only doing MIDI live to 2-track. Carl, while you were talking, it also reminded me of the difference between some of those modules that supported a thing like a filter control. Like imagine there were synths that you couldn't repeatedly do a performance controller back to them through the sequencer, unless it was the 2 that it was pre-assigned with, or the 1. And hopefully it was a filter sweep and not just LFO, trig, and pitch bend. But that was what you got a lot of the time. So we'd go to the system exclusive codes that were sometimes provided at the back of the manual, and you could look up, the other parameters, if you're going to write a librarian or patch editor for the unit, here's the other stuff. These are non-standard MIDI, non-CC, not controllers. And you could sometimes get into making terrible noises because they weren't interpolated and they would jump to the next value rather than smoothly fading. If your delay time turned from 500 milliseconds to 1,000 milliseconds, you'd get all of the zipper noise feeding back into the delay as it made that change unceremoniously instead of smoothly blending. And also, sometimes these units would have very different internal algorithms from patch to patch. So if you sent a MIDI program control change to it, it would reconfigure its internal crap so much that it would potentially glitch or make a cool sound, or sometimes fail to carry the sound over from the outgoing patch to the incoming one. But if it did have like a reverb component or something, or a delay component, you could usually get some interesting unexpected results by actually issuing overload state commands, which like things that it wasn't intended to be capable of dealing with gracefully.
Yes. And the thing about those, so many of that like glitch stuff, and Alex will just give me a sec, is that you do a program change or something like that, or it fires a harmonic or something like that. A lot of the DX stuff used to fire harmonics for some weird, like if it was a super short note, like 2 clicks, it would fire this harmonic. Getting to do the fucking thing twice, like it wouldn't. But yeah, it's part of the fun, I guess. Or is it fun? But it's, you know, man, it's funny. I do agree with you that modern technology has taken the pain out of a lot of it. And that's the thing, is that you sit down at this stuff going, oh, I'm so inspired, I want to do this thing. Why isn't that machine listening to MIDI? Why isn't it setting this thing up? Why isn't it coming up on the board? What's wrong now? I'm now spent 3 hours crawling around on the back of the desk trying to figure out what's going on. And all of that inspiration is gone. And that was, yeah, that was the part that not many people talk about because it wasn't very pretty. Alex, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think what works best for me is to just have a very small setup that's built up on the fly. So I don't have to do much maintenance because there isn't much that can go wrong. I also have like this thing where I can switch between certain states, but it can go wrong. So sometimes I just pull everything out and put new MIDI cables in, configure the channels anew, and then just start this way. What else did I want to say? For me, the thing is that somehow if I just write in software, everything sounds bland. And I don't know why. I know that people can sound stuff exciting just in the box, but I somehow can't, and I need to figure out why. Because every time I do things in hardware, it gets exciting somehow. But if I just write in software, it sounds like paint by numbers and uninspired. So the next thing I wanted to say is I also really enjoy the combination of old gear and new gear, because like MIDI is like this standard which has been like, I think since 1982 almost unchanged until now. So you can put something from 1991 together with something from 2020 and it will work. And sometimes it will work in beautiful ways because they're so different that there's like a weird kind of synergy, which I find really inspiring. Yeah, and also PSA, there are boxes that can convert CC to SysX if you know how to program them. So that might be a thing.
Cool. That's cool. It's very interesting how, yeah, this shit hurts. And it's, there's this really interesting balance between creativity and producing. And like, it's so strange. You get this drive inside you that goes, I want to make this thing happen. And Alex, I totally agree, man. If I could, so many people think, oh, the more gear, then the more better and the more opportunities. Like, nope. Well, I don't think so anyway. Like I think that if I had, you know, to really pare stuff down so I know what gear to use, because I just have too much shit. And with too much shit, for me, comes too much headache and too much responsibility. It's like the Tupperware thing, which I've, you know, I won't go into because it's too random. Alex, talk to me. Get me out of this hole that I'm digging myself.
So the chief editor of the biggest synthesizer print publication here in Germany, is also like a gigging musician, and in his studio he has like a Matrix 12, a Jupiter 6, a Moog Modular. But if you see his live set, it's like a Digitact. I think like the really cheap new Roland Tweak synth, something like it came out last year and cost like $200. And it's like everything else from his studio is just recorded, sampled into the sampler, taken live. And I think his live set is like 2,000 euros combined, but his studio is much larger, but not everything is connected at once. He just makes the sound, samples it into the box, and then the music happens. I think that's quite interesting. And that also inspired me to work this.
That's really cool. Thank you. Raz, talk to me.
One of the things that's almost entirely missing from the frozen in time little period that we're talking about of sequencing and composing is the live performance component. And it's a high wire act, definitely, to run MIDI on stage. There's no doubt about that. It's still, you know, anything that glitches or shuts down that you don't have running redundantly because it's an indie gig and you're, you know, there's no way you can have a second rig running to on standby with a text to switch it in. So it's likely that something's going to shut down or restart or need to be rebooted. And there is excitement in that. And the sounds that you make are amazing sounding, and the couple of knobs that you do have for control can be very expressive, but it doesn't have the same thing. Like, this is a little bit antithetical to most of what we talk about here even. But I've spent about the past year with trying to find my guitar and vocals process, you know, to perform. I don't know who's going to be interested in seeing this happen, but I've landed on there is at least someone. I appreciate that. It is an expressive moment. It is the actual start to finish with no backing tracks that I haven't done ever in decades anyway, that includes the elasticity of change during the performance. I remember I was going to do a lick there, but I'm not feeling it today, and I'm just going to easy play through it. Or I do feel on top of this, and I am thinking ahead from bar 6 to bar 13, where I'm going to have to do that. And I do have my breath, and I do have all this physicality and this attachment. Different mindset, entirely different category of musicianship than, you know, crawling around on the floor, figuring out which MIDI cable is actually plugged in. I mean, I've put way more hours into that than anything else, but this is a different side of it. And I think sitting down at the piano, I don't have the chops to really do a full performance on that. Feels a lot of the same way, Carl. I know I've seen you doing it with your solo performance, live, whichever it actually is, to tape or to video. And I think that's an important part of the personality, the musical personality, to exercise if you have anything in it, and to remember that you can do that. So yeah. I just wanted to sort of touch on that. As the simplicity of it is, right now my chain is guitar, cable, preamp, software. So it's just the guitar with a preamp into a laptop running Ableton for the tones. And I'm using first party, just all built in stuff to try to get the ultimate tone, you know, like Pursuit, which that seems to be working. We kind of got there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Alex, I'd love to hear from you. Then Ivan and Brett, you're quiet. But Alex, talk to me.
Yeah, I totally get what Raziel is saying with the finding your own sound, because I struggle with that, because I know I want to sing, but I don't know if I want to be like operatic, or if I want to distort it, or if I want to be like a rock vocal. And it's also like something that's like really uncomfortable in a way, because it feels like every step you take is like the first step into with your feet in cold water, and it can be kind of grating, and I think that's like my biggest problem right now. On the other hand, I've managed to get into this feeling with a drum machine because I was jamming with my guitarist and he was jamming on his guitar and I was just changing patterns, slightly tweaking the groove, changing the tuning, the timbre, and you can get into that. And the third thing is, if the MIDI channel doesn't find itself or something like that, look if all your gear is up to date, because I had that problem and it was a bug I found and I just updated the firmware and then it worked.
Awesome. I'll just touch on something really quickly that you mentioned about finding your voice. Think of it like this, that your voice is an engine. And when I'm talking about your voice, I'm also talking about your musical style and all that stuff. Your voice is an engine. It's a V8. Oh yeah, it's a V8. Now, step one is you got to get the engine working. So if you want to be rock or opera or whatever, think of that. That's the terrain that you're going to be traveling on. That's about wheels. That's about, mud guards. So regardless, it's going to be powered by that V8. So, and the cool thing about it is, man, you can actually change the wheels. I hope this is making sense. First thing, get the engine running. Like, that's the first thing. Do your scales. Do your scales, do your scales, do your scales. It doesn't matter if it's keyboards. Like, I'm fucking doing scales now. Another exercise I'm doing is I'm trying to play the blues badly. And I will just randomly pick a key and I go, okay, I'm going to play the blues in D flat. And that's testing my theory. And I'm going, well, okay, so from going from the root D flat to the 5, which is F sharp or G flat. Look, I'll keep it to C. If I'm going, I'm in C, if I'm going to the 4, which is the F, I want to use some kind of diminished 5. I want to do something cool there. So I have to be thinking about the mathematics and the theory of music while trying to keep the beat. And I can't stress enough, I'm the worst player in the world. But this is when I'm doing these things, there's areas of my brain that it pushes into, that like dead areas of full of sludge in my head that it's pushing into. Nothing else does that. Like nothing else. And I do all of these puzzles and crypto puzzles and fun stuff, and they all exercise my brain, but there's something about the musicality that is on a timeline deadline that absolutely is exhilarating to my head. And I've got to get better. It's just, there's a higher intelligence there that's waiting for me. That didn't answer your question at all. I'm Carl. Here's Razzie.
I like thinking about the idea of finding a voice, and just to pick that metaphor apart, and because it is metaphorical for a lot of physical processes, learning to produce a certain color, timbre, rhythm, volume, expression that you feel matches what you're intending to do, I think is kind of the general category for anybody finding their voice. And it starts with imitation for most people. It starts with, figuring out which Ziggy Stardust, Thin White Duke, David Bowie era you're gonna sound like, or if you're Peter Murphy imitating Ziggy Stardust, or whatever multi-borrowed expression you're doing. There could be, I don't know what the actual number of hours it is that you need to go through to start recognizing what feels good and what matches your intention and what you can expect to get better at, so that you can do, whether it's range or volume or distortion in your voice. Still strictly talking about literally vocal production. But there is a point after a number of hours and after imitating people that even when you're imitating somebody, you're doing it with your own inflections and your own habits and your own range, and you're recognizing where your limitations are, and you're recognizing, if I work on this, I'll push through that limitation and acquire a new skill. I don't know, maybe it's tube and throat singing for you, maybe it's monk throat singing, maybe it's higher range, maybe it's vibrato. And embodying and possessing those skills takes time. It takes imitating other people doing it, because we've got our prototypes and we got our things we know that hit my ear and I loved it. But that's a process. And I think it's one of those, like, be patient to yourself. Anybody who's doing this, like, be aspirational with your inspirations so that you have a place to get to, like a goal. And really, like, try to give yourself some credit when you get to new levels with that stuff, when you make achievements, when you recognize that you've improved or changed or found a new method or habit, and on that path, you're getting to your own voice. There's no other place that you're going to arrive except an aggregation and culmination of your influences and unique ideas, and being confident with those capabilities and acquiring new ones so that you can produce tones that are the ones that you meant and that you heard in your imagination. And it's that's the best. I have the most to say about that sometimes, because I believe in, the power of singing and voice is something anybody can do, but you might have a really unique thing to offer.
Thank you. And on that, I just want to say, Jesus, I want to join a choir so badly. And it's not like a let's sing Bach. I'm just done with that shit. I just want to, like, why am I going through a blues stage? It's funny, this woman I was saying off camera before that, I was doing a gig in a nursing home. I do tech work, and it was a queer nursing home in Hollywood, of course. And really brilliant bunch. And a woman came along and she sang, and she was easily in her 70s, battling cancer, sang like a motherfucker. She was in Hair. She was in the original Hair, and some of the other crew from the original Hair were in the nursing home. So when she says everybody sing along, everybody fucking sang along, and they raised the damn roof. And they're walking. They don't have any walking canes on there or wheelchairs on their voice. They're still going at it, and that was inspiring to me, because it's like, don't you stop, you fucker. Don't you cry because you're turning 52 and you think you're old. You're not. Keep fucking going. Yeah, she was saying that you get to a point in your life where you just say, fuck it, I'm going to sing the blues. You just don't care anymore. It's like, I don't care what people think, I'm going to sing the blues. And Depeche Mode did that with Songs of Faith and Devotion, which I'm just drowning myself in at the moment. And the funny thing about that album is you listen to it and you go, this band was made for the blues. This was made for gospel. Yeah, so I really want to join a choir. I don't want someone to stick fucking music in front of me. I just want to wail. It's healing. But it is funny that the art of that finding your voice also extends to your guitar and your MIDI programming and the sounds you choose and everything else. But first and foremost, your voice. Your voice is the most important thing you have, I think. Anyway, Brett, hit me. Thanks, Resi. That was great.
Hey, everybody. So I just kind of had a couple comments, not really. Just kind of a couple things to add on. Love my synthesizers, always have. Only thing I don't really like about them is they're not my jamming kind of buddies. So I find as a musician, I got a couple of different approaches. My electronics, VSTs, things like that. Those are those things that is like, I get a kind of an idea in my head. And one of the ones I shared with Carl recently is like, I made the comment that I'm going to do something kind of like a bass rhythm and turn that into hangman's. When I have an idea like that, synthesizers are great. Give me that background that I need to hook into. But after that, what I try to do is eliminate the mechanical nature. I want the mechanical nature. That's when I had the instruments like my voice or the guitar. You bring that human element to it, and I find I can get a lot more characters across really quickly, a lot more emotions, a lot more everything. But the downside to that, and also the upside of that, is iterations. For those, it's like, that's kind of what I'm doing over here. It's just kind of goofing off. I'm just sitting there, I've got old songs queued up that are instrumentals that are not done on guitar, and I'm literally just sitting there going through, just kind of giving myself ideas, and just warming up for later. And what I'll do again, I'll use the machines for what they're good at for me. So, I'm not Kevin Key. I'm not going to think like Kevin Key. And what he can do with a synthesizer and what I can do with a synthesizer are different. The other thing that I kind of had, where it came to voice. So early on to mid, I wanted to kind of mimic Ogre, but Ogre's Ogre. And I found that vocal strain was a real thing. If you're if you're not Ogre, you're not Ogre. So with that came some really cool sounds that every now and then I'll still borrow from, but thing. And what I like to do when I'm writing lyrics is kind of tell you a story of a song, and that's kind of why I don't have the traditional song structure of chorus, verse, break, etc. But I like a lot of elements of traditional music, and one of those that I use to kind of sculpt the voice sound just before, during, going forward is actually Leonard Cohen's "Waiting for the Miracle to Come." I thought about, I started off actually with Dear Angel, actually trying to do a cover of that song and quickly abandoned for my own idea. But what I found in that process is I like his tone, and it's really easy for me to go along with in timbre. And when I add my lyrics and my sound to it, it's extremely censored, which is exactly what I'm going for. So that's just kind of a couple thoughts on my journey on the process. No right or wrong, but hope it helps.
Thank you very much. And I will very quickly say you brought up a really interesting point, whereas it ain't easy jamming with old MIDI gear, like kind of like 87 through to 2000 and something. The act of live jamming with MIDI gear, well, MIDI generation 1 gear, you couldn't jam with it. You need a controller from the modern time, whereas analog stuff, it's made for fucking around and jamming live. Isn't that man, I've never thought about that. That's very interesting. Thank you. Alex, fill my brains with sex goo. That was wrong. Fill my brains with your love. Nah, that was just as wrong.
I think the specific problem that I have is that the thing I naturally gravitate towards are not necessarily the things I think sound good. If I just start improvising a melody, it's a mixture out of maybe pop cliches and some German folk music and maybe Baroque music, and that sounds good, but the things that actually come out of my brain are just cliche melodies. And I've realized that I need to be mindful of what the melody is, and then maybe just take stuff up, make it not as obvious harmonically, make it rhythmically more complex, or make rhythmically more obvious, and just take stuff out so it's not overloaded. And yeah, that's basically my struggle, to just take what is like my intuition and transform it into something that I think sounds pretty beautiful or interesting.
And the keyword there is hum. So the keyword is to actually organically come up with stuff, I think, anyway. But you follow your thing, and I want to hear more in later time about the development and where this is going, because I always find it fascinating. Razzie, the floor is yours, and then we're going to kill this pretty soon.
Yeah. Alex, I love the path you're on. I think that you just described a very unique set of influences to arrive at what can be an extremely unique thing. And none of the components that you mentioned are requirements. You don't have to have a melody. There will be something melodic about the prosody of just delivering it no matter what. That's going to happen. You don't have to have a variety of timbres and expressive ornaments. There's a stoicism and monotony that can be extremely arresting, depending on the work. And I'm only stating the obvious here because, you know, it is something to consider on the path to arriving at which of these elements you want to use. But the real, I don't know if it's a challenge, but I guess the real moment of arrival is to know that you want to deploy these things at these times and feel like you've had the idea and it made it onto the tape or jam session in the way that you intended, and having that ability. So I want to hear where it goes with you too, because like I said, path, cool.
For sure. Alex, I see your hand.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the thing is, I naturally want to sing melodically because that's the way I was brought up. But if I often feel like monotonous vocals would be better, but I need to restrain myself to do it because all my energy, because my intuition is to make a melody with this and this, maybe on a certain scale and so on. And it's very church music, very major or minor. But I sometimes feel it's better if I just have like 3 different pitches and have them more harmonically ambiguous, because that's more the vibe I want. But my intuition is to just make basically like my first music theory exercise, and that's my struggle.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I mean, I love the way you express that. I had to jump right back in and say, I uncharitably perhaps used to sort of make fun of people who would get up on stage and just sort of go up and down the sort of, you know, diatonic scale in the song without any phrasing or variation. And like, how do you remember what you were doing? How do you remember that from night to night, what the actual melody of that song is? You're just sort of wandering around the scale. And that a good melody that works with your harmonic progression is a work, you know, that is effort and something you need to refine and craft and come up with. So I'm right there with you. I think that's well said.
Thank you. My 2 cents worth is going to be when you're doing something for your voice, write it for your voice. Don't write it on a keyboard first or anything else first. Do it with your voice. Because nothing jams like your voice. Best jam there is. But yeah, that's something all of us gotta always be playing with. I actually have to call this because I gotta bugger off and do stuff. But this Zoom's gonna stay open and we're all gonna hang out and chat and do crazy things. This is every Saturday, here. Same time, same channel. It's also on Angelspit's YouTube, and now it's on other things as well. But join us again, Art of Rock, this time next week. I think it's next week. I'm not sure. If it's not, Resi's going to be taking a behind-the-scenes chatty poo. This is made possible with Angelspit's Patreon. It keeps me going. I want to keep you going. You are bloody fantastic. The new album from Ice Planet 9000 is kickstarting now. There's nearly 80 minutes of music in it. In fact, I think we had to edit one of the songs so we could squeeze it onto a disc with 80 minutes of music on it. And now what we're going to do me a favor, go check out the Kickstarter. And there's actually a link to a Spotify where you can listen to the tracks. And the last track actually drops on Monday onto Spotify. So if you don't want to back it, go listen to it, please. We're going to go on over to MTV TV. Diana, if you're there, let's raid. And we shall cover ourselves in joy and mayhem. And if you're not rateable, then we're going to Twitch TV/MTV TV. Thank you, Diana. You guys rock. We'll see you next week. Happy waves of goodbye-dom. Bye. 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 Bye.